there's a Think Progress article out of New York that just talks about how the officer who killed Eric Garner, that his official disciplinary records had been hidden from public scrutiny, and now they're made available. And we've actually seen an increase, and I can't remember who tweeted this earlier, but we've seen an increase in actually protecting the shields, the jackets of officers, post like this more recent wave of activism around police brutality than we had before. We actually see a lot of laws being proposed and instituted nationwide. I think there's like 32 different versions of Blue Lives Matter, Shield type, just different levels of laws that are being passed or being proposed and heard nationwide. So if anybody's interested, this is something probably to organize around as well. But this is happening in the wake and in kind of a backlash because of a demand of accountability and what should actually be done in terms of justice and administering, community policing tactics, etc., versus actually taking a stand and listening to what the community is saying. We have lawmakers, we have legislators, we have people. So again, this there's so many different levels here, right? Organizing around, these issues and getting people to respond and engage directly with their elected officials at the state legislative level. Actually organizing election time to not have people running for positions like DA who either do not have a sense of justice first, because that actually is the purpose. Prosecutors, are supposed to center justice and not necessarily conviction rates in everything that they do. I mean, that's I don't know if all states, but many states have adopted the ABA's standards for prosecutors, and that's a part of, prosecutorial discretion. And we don't actually see that happening in practice. We see what is actually being done as so-called justice at the state or community level is very coded in terms of, systemic racism and other issues that exist within many communities, and it exists within the profession as a whole. In terms of prosecutors, I believe it's something like 79%, 80% of all prosecutors nationwide are white men. You have another small percentage that are white women. Another, I think it's like 16%, somewhere around in there. Less than 20% are white women. And then you have single digits for men of color. And then I think it's 1% or less than 1% are women of color. So it's a very skewed field. And just thinking about, and we're talking about prosecutors as well as when we're talking about enforcement in terms of, officers and how they're treated in these investigations. Some of that, it has to do with local policy making, right? So engaging with your mayoral officials, with your city council officials, engaging with your police chiefs, like how they actually make those determinations on the local level in terms of, how cops are disciplined, what behavior and stuff is to be engaged in. And then you have, what legislative action can be taken. I mean, there's multiple levels of this, but, as a part of that, which is often overlooked. And we've seen this in the Buy Anita campaign, last year with the ousting of Anita Alvarez as the Cook County DA. We've seen this, more recently, we're seeing the importance of prosecutorial discretion and having prosecutors that stick to a certain level of community ethic, and what's happening now down in Florida with State's Attorney Aramis Ayala, who is, having to deal with Rick Scott usurping her authority and overstepping his boundaries. But where prosecutors fit in all this stuff, and I'm getting to the point in terms of this case of I think it's, what's his name, Daniel Pantaleo, is the officer that choked, that put Eric Garner in the chokehold. And when you actually read the definition of what a chokehold is and the discretion of the prosecutor to interpret and determine whether action taken was proper or not, it absolutely matters who the prosecutors are in their community, who those people are that are being elected, that are running for offices, and how do we challenge and engage them during the process, of course, of them doing their duty. So with this, though, it talks about the officer's actual pre-existing before this incident. He had 14 individual allegations lodged against him. He had 7 disciplinary complaints. 4 of those allegations had actually been substantiated by an independent review. And part of the concern is that there is a problem with there are certain officers that they will have a pattern of problematic behavior, but they're not taking off their beats. There's no actual discipline or anything that happens. I mean, when we look at police unions are some of the most formidable in the country. And the problem, though, like some people have made going after police unions and bargaining power as a part of their platforms. And I know this came up during the primary last year a little bit, that this was something that Bernie wasn't really willing to like move on when I think he had to sit down and had the campaign zero conversation because of the potential for, weakening the idea that if you weaken police unions, that thing can be used against other types of unions. But let's just be real. Other unions don't have the same strengths and protections as police unions do. So that's a whole nother conversation there in either. But, there were documents, and this is talking about New York, that there are documents, there are issues in terms of their civilian complaint review board that receives complaints and stuff against, NYPD officers. And the issue is that, these people they have all these issues in their docket, but there's not any actual like discipline or follow through. There was sufficient evidence, apparently, according to these records, of an abusive vehicle stop in 2011, which was actually a two-part claim. There was another abusive stop in Frisk in 2012, which was another two-part claim that was reported by DNA Info in 2016. So that, the community, the civilian board has pushed for harsh penalties, and it can recommend, it can make recommendations, but like the actual launching of like the actual administrative, prosecution in an NYPD trial room, that can actually result in suspension, lost vacation days, termination. But the NYPD, would actually have to follow through, right, on those recommendations. And there's a tendency to like go for a weaker action, such as instruction or additional training. What does additional training matter when, your training manuals or tools and stuff have coded racist language in them or problematic or just reinforce the bad behavior as well. There have been some issues with that recently in the news in a couple of different, police departments where they've used outdated methodologies, which really probably shouldn't have been used at all, but that's the language that's being used. So it's like on the 2012 stop and frisk, for example, he was cleared of, it was an unauthorized frisking, but he was cleared of making an abusive stop, and he had to forfeit 2 vacation days instead of 8. Like, there are so many issues. Like, where someone was saying to me, it's like it doesn't seem to be as prominent what's happening anymore. Like, so we're not, seeing the same level of action in terms of the protests or the vigils. It's still happening. People are still out there engaging and doing what they're doing, but some of the work has shifted. There's the whole big push in New York, for example, right now in terms of raise the age. I mean, there are several different things going on. The 2 big things happening in New York, for example, since I'm talking about New York, are raise the age and shut down Rikers. And raise the age, for those who aren't familiar, is New York State and North Carolina are the only 2 states in the country that automatically charge youth at 16 as adults. Of course, we know that youth under 16 all over the place have been charged as adults. It's not uncommon that happens, but these 2 states, automatically at 16, you're an adult. You're considered an adult and charged that way. It doesn't matter what it is at all. So there's a push for raise the age, and as I wrote the piece a few weeks ago about the Khalif Browder case. The miniseries is still going on. The docuseries is still going on Spike. That's one of the things that has been brought to light, is that at 16 he was put in Rikers, which is an adult prison with folks who are older, more mature for other more serious crimes. And then shut down Rikers. I mean, some of this stuff goes hand in hand. Shut down Rikers, looking at de Blasio. There was a really great post yesterday about how, everyone's like, we got to resist. Okay, but if you're really a progressive, then you have to resist and address these systemic issues that are hurting and taking away from the vitality, the potential in our communities, right? And so for people to say, oh, yay, Bill de Blasio, blah, blah, blah. And yet there's issues in terms of investment in trying to make Rikers a prettier place. It's still going to be no amount of investment, basically from the position of organized and activist, formerly incarcerated persons, no amount of investment in Rikers is going to make it quote unquote better. Like, it is a cesspool. There are so many different issues. Rikers just needs to be closed, in a nutshell. And hopefully in the next couple of weeks, I'll have someone to come back and talk about the Rikers, the shutdown Rikers movement, and talk some more. I would, through my dad, I think I can get someone from Critical Resistance to come talk to us more about the prison industrial complex and the prison abolitionist movement as well. But these are conversations and considerations that we have to be having, which I think are more important than going back and forth for people about, she sucked or Bernie would have won or whatever.